The Industrial Revolution not only created new tools of warfare, such as the machine gun and submarine, but also changed the balance of power between nations, and even the fundamental building blocks of power. Coal and steel producing nations became more powerful, and oil became a global strategic resource. Urbanization and industrialization affected domestic and international politics, changing the motivations and context for war. The artificial intelligence revolution is causing similar changes in human society, economics, politics, and the metrics for power. History suggests that the winners during periods of disruptive change are not always those who develop the technology first or have the best technology, but those who uncover the best ways of using it.
My name is Kara Frederick from the Center for New American Securities Technology Program, and I'm excited to announce the new release of our new Artificial Intelligence report, titled Artificial Intelligence, What Every Policymaker Needs to Know. You can pick up hard copies at the table in the middle if you haven't already done so. If not, you can go look at the full report online at our new CNAS AI webpage, cnas.org/AI. Go check it out. It basically highlights all of our AI content in one place, including the full video of the teaser you just saw. It's about 6 minutes long. It has all of our podcasts, our YouTube playlists, and most importantly, our artificial intelligence publications, including the rest of the reports in this series that are due out in July. So again, cnas.org/AI. Take a look if you so fancy. I'm also excited to talk about the work of our Artificial Intelligence Task Force. This task force brings together former government leaders, academic experts, and private industry leaders, all to tackle the challenges of the artificial intelligence revolution. So over the next 16 months, what this body of experts will do is look at how AI affects national security, and critically, how the United States can remain a leader in this space. We have with us a co-chair of that task force, former Deputy Secretary of Defense, Bob Work. We also have Elsa Kenya, CNAS adjunct and author of the inimitable Battlefield Singularity Report, which chronicles Chinese investments in AI. And then to round out the panel, we have Peter Kniff, the Vice President of Strategy and Planning at BAE Systems. So the way this will work is all a lot about 30 minutes for us to have a discussion here on the stage, and then I'll turn it over to the audience for Q&A. So that said, let's get started. And Bob, we'll start with you. Given your background at the Pentagon and as an architect of the third offset, what do you think are some vital defense applications of AI, and where do you see this technology going in the future?
Well, the third offset posited that AI and the autonomous operations that AI would enable, and it was a hypothesis that it would be the central most important competition that we would have to win in to maintain our military technical advantage. And we said, hey, we don't know exactly how this will be, Cara, but we knew for sure that we wanted to inject machine learning in every aspect of our battle networks that we possibly could, because the thinking was that it would allow us to adapt more rapidly in a fast-changing combat situation. Human-machine collaboration, using the advantages that machines have and humans have to work together to make relevant decisions. And you see this happening right now, for example, in Project Maven. You let the machine do all of the screening of the video, and it just tells the analysts what they need to think about, and they can make decisions together far better than either one of them could do their own. Assisted human operations is bringing the power of AI actually down to the individual operators. Human-machine combat teaming, this would be manned and unmanned platforms working together. And then cyber and electronic warfare hardened, collaborative and swarming autonomous weapons. Now those are the 5 ways that we thought we would get operational advantage, but we also think there's an enormous potential for robotic process automation throughout the entire defense-wide account, and hopefully be able to save money that would then be able to be put back into the program to buy systems and more research and development.
Peter, I'm interested, coming from the private sector, how does the private sector see these defense applications of AI?
Actually, it's quite broad. There's no, for us right now, there is no grand plan around AI. If you went to our website, you wouldn't see a /AI, and you probably wouldn't think of us as an AI company, nor would I. But a few years ago, we thought about how do we tap into this broader commercial technology base better than we're doing today? Because the advancements and the money going into that area are so tremendous. We do many very specialized defense things, but this huge technology base, how do we tap into that? As we thought about where we would do that and how we would do that, we kept coming back to how many of the things we do today, whether it's electronics or the services we do or even platforms, will need to be more cognitive, will need to have more intelligent features, will need to be more adaptive, and how AI and machine learning plays into so many of those areas, not exclusively, but that area, but it plays into so many of the things we'll be doing. So as we think about next generation capabilities, products, systems, more and more AI and machine learning is becoming relevant and is even being applied today in many areas. We have tons of examples of where we're already working on it and already applying it in systems that are, not operational today, but already starting to affect systems that we deliver for our customers. So it's quite an important area for us.
So I think that sort of lays the foundation for the topic of our conference today, which is strategic competition. And as you all have known, Elsa has written very extensively about strategic competitions between the US and China, especially regarding AI. So then how is China doing on their pledge to become the world leader in AI by 2030?
I think certainly China's ambitions are clear in this regard, and beyond simply imitating and transferring technologies, China is increasingly seeking to become a premier global innovation center for AI, and along the way forging really a new paradigm of innovation that takes advantage of extensive partnership between dynamic private companies that are really at the forefront of the global AI revolution, throwing strong state support and funding behind them, and trying to facilitate deeper connections to the military and defense industry as well. I think certainly China's also looking at a number of these impactful military applications of AI and often adapting or adopting US approaches along the way. And a couple applications I'd point to would include a swarm intelligence. We've seen some major Chinese demonstrations of swarms, both of UAVs and recently even of USVs, swarms in the air and at sea, focusing on the asymmetric potential of these capabilities. So seeing a major focus on incorporating AI into cyber defense and potentially future cyber operations, as well as AI to achieve dominance in the electromagnetic spectrum, such as through cognitive electronic warfare. And I think really it's clear that Chinese leaders recognize that AI is integral to future national competitiveness, as well as a number of these military capabilities. And I think certainly some of the critical variables going forward will be how effectively China is able to leverage the massive amounts of funding that it's directing to both near-term applications and next-generation research and development, as well as the focus on building up human capital and talent, which I think will be the key battleground in terms of how this competition plays out in the future.
So then, with the cognition of what Peter and Bob said about the future of AI, what does that mean for US competitiveness in the future of AI?
I think certainly I would say that US competitiveness should not be taken for granted, and it's clear that although the US did have a leading role in some of the latest revolutions in military affairs, Chinese leaders at the level of Xi Jinping recognize a critical opportunity now, and responding to initiatives like the Third Offset and tracking some of the trends in these emerging technologies. There's a major focus on looking to take advantage of China's emergence as a would-be science and technology superpower and ensuring its own future advantage and really seeking to leap ahead. So certainly I agree that we should keep an eye out for the emergence of China's first offset, so to speak, and not assume that the traditional US military technical advantage that we've, in some cases perhaps taken for granted in the past, will be reliable in the future.
So then, Bob, I know you've talked about this a lot, but what public and private sector actions are needed to ensure that the US remains a global leader in AI?
Well, I think the most important thing is, as I said, we got together the Defense Science Board, who were very, very, very deeply involved in all sorts of different technologies: blockchain, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, additive manufacturing. And they said the single most important competition that DoD must be able to dominate in is AI and machine learning. And so that was a pretty important finding. And so, in my view, to be competitive, the United States has to be able to forthrightly say AI and machine learning is going to be central to economic and military competitiveness, and we as a nation will respond. And I believe the Chinese AI plan, to me, is a Sputnik moment. The Chinese have said we want to surpass the United States in both economic and military competitiveness through this avenue. And so, to me, you have to have an executive branch, something which explains to the nation why we need to marshal our resources. And I think it really needs to focus on how we do public-private partnership in this regard, and we can talk about this later, obviously. On the congressional side, I know there's going to be a congressional commission. I think inevitably they're going to focus on the legal, moral, and ethical limitations of or how far we want to take AI and machine learning in a democracy. And then inside the Department of Defense, there's going to be a joint AI center that's going to be focused on applications. You're going to need all three of these things for us to be able to compete with a very vigorous competitor who is intent on winning this race.
Since you brought it up, can we talk a little bit more about the Joint AI Center? I know you sort of herald this in the beginning, and it looks like your vision is actually becoming a reality as of April. So how does that work? Can you talk a little more about the Joint AI Center?
Well, it was actually a vision of the Defense Innovation Board, led by Eric Schmidt, and bringing people like Jeff Bezos and all of these, and they said they made the same decision. You've got to get after AI and machine learning. It's changing business. It's changing the way we look at business, and it's going to change the way that you operate. And one of the first recommendations they made a year and a half ago was to stand up a joint AI center. And the reason why is in the battle for talent, we don't have enough talent to put AI experts in every single service at every single level, and you're going to have a central repository that helps you build that talent. So they said you have to get a joint AI center. And I think within the next month, I think an announcement will come that the Joint AI Center is ready to go. And so, in my view, it's been too long in coming, but I'd rather that the department get it right rather than get it fast. So I'm hoping that they've got it right.
So then, Peter, we've sort of talked on about the U.S. as a hub of AI innovation. What private sector actions do we need to take in order to ensure that the U.S. remains as such?
Yeah, well, I also wanted to build my comments off of what Bob just talked about, the kind of competition for talent, and it's really changed. We used to, as an aerospace defense company, we used to think mainly about our peers, losing our best people to, the Raytheons of the world or the Lockheeds or whatever, and attracting them from there. But now when really good people leave, who do we see them go to? We see them increasingly go to Google, Amazon, Apple, you name it, as well as some of our direct competitors. So it's a different world, a different battle for talent, if you will, every day that we face. And so we need, as a society, to build up the talent base, through R&D funding, everywhere from NSF through to DoD, the education system, and increasing the diversity of our technical talent, because we're not tapping into the full gene pool we have in some of these technical fields where women and maybe minorities aren't as encouraged. So I think some of those broad societal things are really, really important to build up the talent base that we tap into. And then as a company, we need to be able to attract people to the kind of work we do and the kind of missions we support. Fortunately, we find that our people are really motivated because they believe in our customers' missions. So we have a lot of that, and our peers do as well. And then finally, I would say, as a company in the private sector, recognizing this is an important technology, we're not going to have a center like DoD does, but we're thinking about how do we accelerate the adoption of this technology in our company. And that doesn't necessarily involve being on the forefront of R&D and being the one who creates the next invention in AI. That would be great if we are, and it would be more for our customer missions. It's more about how do we get people to understand the technology, understand business, and can apply this to business problems, whether it's a product or how we operate in our internal operations, because that's going to happen in every industry, and we need to be doing that too. So I think the private sector is grappling with and experimenting with how to accelerate the adoption of these things where they make sense. It's not just the Amazons of the world, it's every kind of company you can think of, probably.
So then, Elsa, much has been made of this civil-military fusion, especially in China. Is it really as ominous as it sounds? Is that collaboration as effective as one would think?
So I think certainly under Xi Jinping, China has prioritized this concept of military-civil fusion, even elevating it to the level of a national strategy directed by a commission that he personally leads. So clearly it's a priority for Chinese leadership, particularly in dual-use emerging technologies like artificial intelligence. That being said, I think China will face a number of obstacles as well in actually realizing the full potential of this concept, given some traditional barriers, not unlike in some cases those in the US, between the commercial sector and the defense industry. And though certainly there are very active state-driven efforts to start to break down those barriers and create new mechanisms to facilitate deeper integration and partnership there, ranging from joint laboratories that bring together places like the PLA Academy of Military Sciences and either civilian universities, and in some cases partnering with a number of private companies as well. There's even actually what I might call a DIUX with Chinese characteristics, a National Defense Science and Technology Innovation Rapid Response Team that's been launched in Shenzhen, which is a global center of innovation in many respects that's trying to ensure that the Chinese military can leverage commercial technologies to serve defense purposes. So in certain cases, China is actually trying to learn from the US model for defense innovation and apply certain aspects to it. I think certainly the PLA, the Chinese People's Liberation Army, is not known to be an agile or innovative organization. So certainly there will be some major challenges for them as they try to reach out to the commercial enterprises that are very much the forefront of AI in China. But I think the combination of the level of prioritization that military-civil fusion is receiving, again, at the level of Xi Jinping, and a lot of these new mechanisms that are being stood up at the national level, at the provincial and even municipal level, could start to have a greater impact going forward. And certainly, I think a lot of these will bear watching. Even beyond the DIUX with Chinese characteristics, there also are a growing number of DARPA-style challenges that the Chinese Air Force and Chinese Army, for instance, have organized for unmanned ground vehicles and for swarms of autonomous drones. So I think certainly there are a number of lines of effort actively underway, and I think certainly the extent to which China is able to realize this concept will be a key determinant of its future military competitiveness in really incorporating and leveraging these technologies going forward.
Peter, what about you? We've talked about the chasm between the private and public sectors. So how does the US go about narrowing that from a private industry perspective?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I can speak for all of private industry because we're a little bit different, right? Somebody I used to work with in consulting when I did that kind of work for a number of years had this great chart that showed, how DoD views itself. And it's a picture of a gorilla, right? Big gorilla. And then how industry views DoD, and it's this little mouse. I mean, even if they're willing, unlike the recent Google situation, even if they're perfectly willing to work with Department of Defense, it's just such a small, often difficult to serve customer, and that's not a criticism of the people at DoD. It's a fact of life. Congress creates many of the laws and regulations. It's very difficult to get around some of that. I know we have all these innovative ways and approaches, but when we hear about what venture capitalists are telling their companies they invest in, often they're saying, don't do that vertical defense because it's too hard to serve. Focus on all these other areas. They're bigger. It's going to be easier. And so as we think about, our form of private sector, that a big part of our company serves customers like Department of Defense. We know how to do that. We have people who believe in that. We have the processes to do that. What we need to get better at is bridging that divide inside our company. We have great people who really understand our customers' missions and do all kinds of great things to build capability for that. How do we draw in the technology that's out there in the commercial world and adapt it and apply it and sometimes invent new things for our customers' missions? If we can get better at that, that can help, I think, bridge some of this divide. Not all of it, but a lot of it.
And then you guys talked a lot about building a new workforce. So how do we build a new workforce that understands AI and all its aspects and sort of readies it for an integration into large swaths of American society and to make it salutary for the American people? How do we do that from all of your perspectives? I'm interested in all of your takes.
Well, gosh, I think it's some of the things I mentioned earlier. I think we need as a society to build a more technically talented workforce, because increasingly the kinds of work that's going to be out there is going to require, if not an understanding of this, the ability to work and in these kinds of fields. AI is no different in that area. It's certainly an important area, but it's no different in that area. And I think tapping into broader talent pool and the educational system that in this country could be so much better are all part of that. And then in companies like ours, we need to do a better job at attracting people to the kind of work we do and tapping into, the kinds of great things that we're about and our customers' missions are about, and communicating that better. Because I think that's really our edge we find in attracting people, is they can do really cool stuff and do it for something that really matters. Okay, it's great to develop a better way to target people with advertising and sell, more cars or detergent or whatever, but, sometimes when you think about what you did in life, is that really what you accomplished, or is it something of national importance? So that's something we need to do a better job at communicating, and that's not just government, that's also industry.
And Bob, I know you have some thoughts on the human capital question.
Yeah, after Sputnik, I think it was called Schedule G, I can't remember, but it was a special schedule for government employees, and it was specifically designed to draw in engineers, aeronautical experts, computer science. Ash Carter came into the department under this special schedule. In my view, the government ought to think of two things. One, a national AI Reserve Officer Training Corps, in which the government pays full freight for anyone that goes into any of the technologies that are associated with this: machine learning, computer coding, algorithm development. Pay their full freight. They graduate, they go to the Googles and Amazons, but 2 days out of every month, they drill with a unit, and they try to look at the unit's problems and say, this is how AI could actually help you execute your mission better. And then 14 days a year, they'd go to a major exercise and get a sense on how the joint force operated together and say, oh my gosh, this is the way you do it. So schedule AI. Try to attract young people, go after these different types of way to, I think Peter's exactly right. We may not be able to match the salary of a Google, but I guarantee you some of the problems we work on will be a lot more exciting than anything anybody does in Google. So hopefully we'll be able to start to attract a new generation of young AI savvy people into the department.
So Elsa, what about China? We know some of the development plans that they're working on to bolster their AI talent. What steps are they taking, and what can the US do to effectively counter the Chinese steps to bolster their talent?
If you look at how the Chinese government is thinking about talent, I think that really reinforces the urgency of the US taking this much more seriously as a really strategic imperative going forward. For the time being, the US has a major advantage here. A critical mass of the world's AI talent is still in places like Silicon Valley, and I hope that we can sustain that, but increasingly the Chinese government is looking to really build up a national educational infrastructure for developing AI experts and researchers. A range of universities are launching new AI centers and institutes, sometimes partnering with private companies like Baidu to develop experts who could go into commercial industry or could in some cases go into the military defense industry. There are also a range of pretty unique partnerships underway. So for instance, Kai-Fu Lee is working with the Chinese Ministry of Education on a new initiative that's on track to train 500 AI teachers and 5,000 AI students within the next 5 years. The Chinese Ministry of Education has also launched a new open platform that's intended to deliver AI education more broadly and also provide some of the underlying data and tools that are critical to lowering the barriers to entry in AI. And this notion of military-civil fusion also extends into how China is thinking about talent, to ensure that they have a sort of resource base of experts who can hopefully move with some facility between those spheres. And beyond this focus on building up human capital domestically, there's also fairly active recruitment efforts ongoing internationally, that China's looking to draw upon AI talent from across the world, from recruiting students and researchers from places like Silicon Valley and leading US universities, sometimes through the efforts of private companies and sometimes through the incentives of state talent plans.
Can you talk more about that, especially with regard to Chinese investment in US startups?
Sure. So I think certainly, well, I would say first of all that beyond competition, which we've been talking a lot about today, there's also quite a lot of cooperation and engagement between US and Chinese innovation ecosystems, and these flows of ideas and talent between Beijing and Silicon Valley, for instance, can be mutually beneficial, and I think reflect that AI is in many respects open and collaborative as even open source in many cases as a technology. So I think certainly this can enrich both the US and China, but I think in some cases this sort of entanglement, so to speak, can also be exploited when you have Chinese policies that are advancing a very techno-nationalist agenda, and often can be difficult to disentangle, for instance, when Chinese companies like Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and iFlyTech, that on one hand are commercial enterprises, but on the other hand have been branded national champions by the Chinese government. It can be difficult to disentangle when they're acting based primarily on commercial interests and when they are supporting state objectives that the Chinese party state is seeking to advance in AI. That does create a dual-use dilemma, so to speak, for a number of these activities, given the potential applications and the very blurred boundaries between these spheres, particularly when the Chinese Communist Party is now requiring that many of these same tech companies have a party secretary and a Chinese Communist Party committee and engage in party building work with their workforces. So I think certainly it's an interesting dynamic there on many levels. And with regard to the US response, I would say that certainly in addition to focusing on building this workforce within DoD and more broadly, I think we need to look to continuing to attract a lot of the world's top AI talent to the US and really welcoming and encouraging experts from around the world.
Makes sense, but I want to hit more on the dual-use nature of these systems. So, Bob, could AI contribute to maintaining authoritarian regimes? We've seen China's use of facial recognition and what this might lay the foundation for going forward. Does that keep you up at night at all? Are you thinking about it?
Well, that's why I think Congress will inevitably get into the moral and ethical and legal boundaries that we want to put around AI and the bundle of technologies in democracies. I don't know if any of you, I think many of you probably have HBO, and if you do, there's a HBO news show called Vice. It comes out every week, 2 15-minute news segments. If you have HBO on demand, go find Vice and watch the second episode of this current season. And it is how China is using facial recognition technology in their country. 5 million cameras are spying on their citizens. That will soon be 30 million cameras. They track every individual through facial recognition in the metropolitan areas, and soon it will be the entire country. The young lady from Vice showed a post at an intersection, and it literally showed a young Chinese woman who jaywalked against traffic, and within minutes, the billboard said, "Kara, what a dirty person, she jaywalked." Right, they identify the person and they put it up and they try to shame them, say, "Hey, you need to follow the rules," and it's a means of population control. I mean, I'm a big movie fan. One of the first full-length scientific movies was called Metropolis, and it was about a doctor who lost his wife. He created a robot to run the city, and the robot took over. And so I am more worried. People worry about lethal autonomous weapons and machines making lethal decisions, Terminators and Skynets. No, the most scary thing about AI is the means that a government could use to control, influence its population. What China is doing with their social credit score is quite scary and quite disturbing. So this is something that we as a democracy have to say, what are the boundaries we're going to put around this, and where are we not going to go? And this will be a competition between authoritarian regimes and democracies, and we'll just have to see how the competition comes out.
Well, that's heartening. Elsa, what about the social credit score? Does it live up to the hype? Are you as scared as Bob is about what it lays the foundation for going forward?
So I think certainly China's social credit system is at a relatively early stage in its development. It, in many respects, is still under experimentation with a number of different both local options that different cities are starting to explore and different companies providing pilot programs. So it's not a single or monolithic thing, and I think it will be scary, but it's not quite there yet. So there's some great academic research out there looking at its construction and some of the imperatives behind it, but I'd say that I think certainly the underlying animus or the logic motivating it is, again, this beyond enhancing levels of social trust or almost a function analogous to the credit score in certain respects, it is focused on new mechanisms for controlling China's population. And certainly going forward, I think it could become more scary along the lines of the sci-fi scenarios we may fear, though it isn't at that point now. But I say more broadly, I think a lot of these technologies and their applications within China do raise quite fundamental questions about the future of democracy, particularly since this won't stay in China. Already, Chinese companies are exporting a lot of these same technologies, including to Singapore, Malaysia, and I think increasingly we'll see these sorts of capabilities emerge globally. And certainly, I hope that we can find ways to promote uses of AI that are consistent with liberal and democratic values, but it is concerning given how attractive these tools will be for a number of authoritarian regimes going forward.
Yeah, I just have this HBO Vice show is so scary. You go up to get into a public restroom, you have to get facially scanned, and if you're in the system, you get. The girl is right there, and it looks at her and says, okay, you can use the public restroom, and then it goes zzz, and you get a precise length of toilet paper. That's it. There's no toilet paper in the public restrooms. You have to get scanned to go in and use the restrooms. So,
By
you know,
surface area?
I don't know what the heck it was, but you just sit here and you go, wow, this is pretty weird.
Well, if we're talking about attracting talent, I think that might have a negative effect. So that might rebound to our balance, but to our advantage. But just as a strategist, this Chinese facial recognition sounds incredibly scary. It sounds like sci-fi episodes. It's happening today, but it also brings me back to what is the source of competitive advantage in AI? Talent, we've talked about talent. Are we going to have better talent than China? I don't know. I think we got to at least stay even in the future. We maybe do today, right? We got to attract people. We got to be an attractive place to be. Better technology, algorithms, computing, I don't know. I think that's an ephemeral advantage if we even have any today. So I think it comes down to the data. And I think that's what the facial recognition is partly about. More data, better data, relevant data than others. And as a company, if we're going to be a leader in certain aspects of AI for some of the things we do for customers, we have to think about better data or privileged access to data, even if it isn't our data, because that's going to be a key source of competitive advantage. Now, that doesn't automatically translate to the nation state level, but I wonder, as a nation, how are we going to grapple with that issue around data is a key source of competitive advantage? We have, concerns about privacy, right? And every day when we open an app, we make a trade-off of giving up some privacy to give these tech companies our data. And that's what they want. That's why you use the app for free. They want your data. Because more data means more power in things like AI. So how do we grapple with that as a government and a nation is going to be really critical in this area.
Any ideas, Bob?
Well, as I said, right now, we're under attack every day. I'll call them governance and societal cohesion attacks. Authoritarian regimes try to find fissures in democracies and widen the fissures and deepen them to destabilize the democracies and make them less strong and less coherent. Right now, they're doing these attacks with software bots that are pretty straightforward in humans. An AI-enabled society and governance cohesion attack would be a scary thing. And so, as I said, our AI in this case has to be better than their AI. I believe it's an existential fight between authoritarian regimes and democracies. So, I mean, we have got to decide the limits of ethical and moral and legal boundaries that we're going to set as a nation, and we're just going to have to work through them. It's a very difficult debate to have, but we're going to have to do it.
But given that grim outlook, and in addition, some of the hype and the fear that surrounds AI, how do we effectively communicate the very real opportunities and challenges that this technology offers in a constructive manner? I'm thinking, revamp the narrative. How do we communicate that? How do we let people know that AI isn't a terrible thing, that it won't be the harbinger of all of our dooms? Elsa?
Great question, and a tricky one. I think certainly there can be a lot of fear and hype that these technologies provoke. A lot of talk lately of an AI arms race, which I think is not the right framework for this, given that AI is not a weapon. It's a range of technologies that, in addition to military applications, will provide tremendous opportunities across a range of applications and sectors. So I think certainly focusing on the notion of AI for good and ways in which AI can enhance our education system going forward, or have a range of applications in healthcare, can reinvigorate economic growth and development worldwide. I think certainly, I think it's worth keeping in mind that the military sphere is a limited part of the overall landscape of applications and opportunities that AI will bring, and hopefully focusing on that dimension of it, where there may be opportunities for cooperation globally, will be vital going forward as well.
Peter, besides data, any other ideas?
I guess go back to when I worked for a few years on the Hill, and we used to have something called the Office of Technology Assessment. There was a change of party control. They got rid of it. It was government waste, whatever. But it served a valuable function with these debates in a way that not the public can absorb, but also Congress can absorb. We have some of that. I mean, Congressional Research Service, but they're not a convener of experts like that group was. So I don't know. I think we need more of things like that to have these debates, because I don't know where that happens today. I don't, maybe in the think tank world, but I think we need a little bit, maybe attached to the Congress, a little more brain power attached to the part that does the politicking.
And I'd just like to state for the record, I am an optimist in AI. It is going to change our society for better. And in the military sphere, it will make us more competitive, and it will make us more economically competitive. But we are in a competition with authoritarian regimes. They're going to use AI differently than a democratic regime or a democratic nation. And we've got to debate this and figure it out. It's interesting, even with, there have been 1 or 2 or 3, maybe 5 accidents with the self-driving cars. But right now, still for millennials and for young people, there's widespread support for going to driverless cars. There hasn't been, oh my gosh, this is terrible, because I think they instinctively get that if you go to driverless cars, you may have accidents and people will still die, but you will have far fewer accidents and far fewer people will die. And it's the same thing on the military side. Somebody says, oh my God, I don't want to have AI helping in the military. And I say, can't you imagine replacing the explosive ordnance disposal technician with a robot that has machine learning in it and can defuse bombs autonomously? I mean, are you kidding me? That's going to save a lot of lives. So I just want to state for the record, I'm a big optimist in AI, but we're in a competition, and we need to get after it and have these debates as a country, and figure out how we build our talent and how we use it for the greater good.
So we've got about 15 minutes left, and we'll open it to audience Q&A.
Hi, Sidney Friedberg, Breaking Defense. A fundamental question, which may be too arms racy for you, Dr. Genya, but basically, are we, the U.S., currently ahead in militarily relevant AI, since the field's so huge? Let's specify that. If we are, can we really tell that we're ahead, given how fast this moves? And even if we are and can tell we are, how do we avoid sort of the France 1940 problem, where the people who invent the technology and have the best technology don't actually have a clue how to apply it properly, and someone who may have slightly inferior stuff just uses it a lot better in the military sphere?
That's a great question, and I think it's honestly one that we don't know how to answer at this point. If AI will indeed be critical to the future of military power, I don't think there are really metrics or indicators right now that would enable us to really determine what that balance looks like. Could AI fundamentally change the balance of power between the US and China and the Indo-Pacific? Potentially, but it's hard to evaluate what the competition looks like at this point, because certainly, for instance, if you look at something like China's advances in swarm intelligence, Chinese state media has made a point of saying that their swarms have broken world records and been bigger than those the US has publicly tested, but size perhaps isn't what really matters here relative to the complexity and sophistication of algorithms. And that's something that's harder to measure or evaluate based on visible or easily knowable indicators. Similarly, if you look at China's focus on the use of AI to enhance battle management and command decision-making, and certainly, again, with the caveat that all of my work is based on open sources, so I speak primarily based on what I can tell or read, or can have a sense of projects that are underway. It's tricky to. I can speak to the particular lines of effort, but I can't speak to their level of advancement with any degree of precision at this point. So I think it's a great question insofar as that will be a major uncertainty going forward for many of these applications, and certainly a question worth continuing to ask as this competition matures and continues.
Let me just add that computers, artificial intelligence beat chess grandmasters. Then the next big game was Go. And an AI beat a Go grandmaster about 5 years sooner than we expected. And when we did AlphaGo, which was the second iteration, Eric Schmidt, Alphabet, pretty smart guy in this, he went to China. He said, we went over there thinking we had 5 years on the Chinese. If we have 6 months, we're lucky. And they're moving really fast. They're among the best coders in the world. They're probably the best gamers in the world, which is going to be very central to virtual training. So this is a race. This is a big race. We've never gone up against a high technology competitor like China. So it's impossible right now for me to say, are we ahead or are we not? But I think the department understands the stakes here and is starting to move with the Joint AI Center and more applications. I think we've got a pretty decent chance of being a good competitor in this race.
And we'll take one more over here.
I'm wondering, from a more abstract academic point of view, we've seen various technologies come into academia and often think that they're going to help everything or a lot of things, and then they become another silo. And in the academic world, the silos have a heck of a lot of trouble communicating with each other. And then there's competition for silos. Do the engineers capture AI? Do the computer scientists capture AI? Do the political scientists capture AI because of the implications for society that you were talking about? I was wondering what kind of structure will allow us to develop AI talent in the best way that is the most useful within the context of knowledge improvement generally, not only for military applications, but for society at large. Easy question.
Peter, you going to try?
I'll give it a shot. I think, after World War II, I don't think this country said, certainly there was the space race, but I don't think this country said, we're just going to decide what the next thing is in 20 years and just spend money on those couple things. We broadly funded the research community It led to tremendous research capability in the higher education community. It led to lots of things that got turned into industrial capability. Certainly the government spent a lot of money on applications. Personally, as a former space person, we probably overspent on space over the years, civil space maybe, unless that's your dream to land on Mars and all that. So I think we got to really rethink why we fund organizations like NSF and reinvigorate those kinds of things, because it's not always going to be AI. To your point, computer scientists kind of own AI and machine learning now, but there are other approaches to solve some of these problems. We've got a group that does a lot of DARPA work. They've got some tremendous capability they've developed over the years that aren't necessarily AI and machine learning to do some of these things. And sometimes, if it's safety critical, it's better to use that engineering approach, and maybe later AI and machine learning will come in. So it's got to be that kind of approach to solve the problems. Broad capability building, not just pick winners. I don't think that works that well, personally.
And I don't think AI is something that can or should be limited to any single silo or discipline. It will have relevance to every sector, every discipline, to applications we haven't even thought of yet. So I think certainly having a highly integrated approach to AI and trying to build cross-disciplinary expertise, which is something that China is actively looking to do as well, will be critical going forward to make sure that experts in all fields have the knowledge they need to use AI to solve the particular problems that their discipline is facing.
Over here.
David Lai from the U.S. Army War College. Bob, really great to see you again. A couple of years ago, you were at the Army War College and talked about great things about U.S. strategy. I asked you a question about the game of Go, and you still probably recall your great answer to my question as well. I'm glad you mentioned this Go game, AlphaGo, conquering the human players recently. I'm the one who brings about the strategic significance of this game of Go, the Chinese invention. And Kissinger learned it all from me, and he used my idea to write his book on China. You bring up a very interesting question that I am now working with Graham Allison of Harvard University on your question. Is actually, if the United States plays football and China plays Go, who is going to prevail? Okay, that's a very interesting question, which kind of come to address the issue we are here to talk about today, because from the discussion, we got a very good sense that AI is the way to go, but less clear is that what about it? What's going to happen? What's going to turn out to be? And in our context, I think that we can kind of put it into two broad aspects. One is hard one, is military capability, new weapons, new forces. You're going to revolutionize future battlefield and the way we fight. But then more importantly is decision making. AlphaGo is able to defeat the human being is because of the machine learning. It's very fundamentally different from defeating a chess player. Very different. So if we can, the question is, if we can invest our money on decision-making part, you're going to solve your issue about how we're going to figure out the Chinese in an authoritarian way, and then operating in a Go mindset to deal with the American democracy that operates on the chess and the football mindset. How are we going to do that? I think the decision-making process should be bigger in our investment.
Well, I think all of the above. The AI is going to help in decision making. It's going to be helping in prediction. It's going to be helping in predictive maintenance. It's going to be helping in allowing unmanned systems to work together. And the answer is, I don't know where it goes. We're going to go through a period of experimentation. And I can't remember, I think it was somebody said, it's the side that puts things together. In 1975, the Army says, we're going to own the night. They said, we want to be able to operate at night as effectively as we're going to operate in the day. And if all it was putting technology, putting night vision goggles on every single soldier's head, then every single army would have been able to own the night. But no, you had to train your people how to operate at night quietly, because it doesn't matter if you can see at night if you're so noisy it's like, well, they're coming. You had to have all of the different control measures. You had to teach the squad leaders. You had to teach the company commanders. You had to teach the battalion commanders. You had to do all of this stuff. And by 1985, about 10 years later, the Army owned the night. But it was very difficult for any other service to duplicate that because it was all the stuff. It was the technology. It was the operational concepts. It was the training. It was the doctrine. So I don't know where AI will have the biggest breakthrough first. That's going to be dependent on a lot of experimentation, and it might be decision making, might be something else. Just don't know.
All right, we have time for one final question right here.
Adam Siegel, Insight Through Analysis. So when we look at the commercialization and how the commercial world works, China demands an awful lot of access. If AI is a critical defense arena, how do we deal with the reality that the commercial world does not see choices other than to be sharing IP with China when it's trying to get access to the market? And a very small, quick second associated, you hearing the gaming, esports now have greater viewership than all the professional sports in the United States combined. Should we be looking for the military academies to be setting up esports teams and having a new competition if this is so critical for national defense?
All right. So how long do we have? And I think definitely it's the intersection of economic and technological entanglement with strategic competition poses fairly novel challenges. I mean, Google has recently set up an AI research center in China. Baidu has their AI research centers in Silicon Valley. There's a fairly dynamic exchange and engagement in economics and particularly in this commercial dimension. And I think in many respects that should be welcomed, but at the same time, I think we need to start thinking about what appropriate safeguards should be when we're talking about dual-use technologies that can be fairly sensitive and can have applications both for censorship and surveillance and also for military power going forward. So I think certainly, again, I don't think that there is a single or simple solution to how we mitigate risk in this case, but I think certainly starting to look more closely at, for instance, when a Chinese company or university sets up a joint venture or collaborative laboratory with an American or Australian or another research institute, what are the terms for the data that comes out of that laboratory and research? Who controls the intellectual property? Does the Chinese partner involved in that arrangement have clear or direct ties to the Chinese military or government in certain respects? I think certainly trying to sustain cooperation and engagement and above all else, the openness that the U.S. benefits from most of all, that is integral to our innovation, but also looking to come up with targeted safeguards and countermeasures when that sort of engagement can also be exploited in certain cases. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I don't want to give the impression that the Chinese are 10 feet tall. They're just very clever competitors, and they're extremely savvy. So they took a look at the CFIUS process. The CFIUS process was the process we set up so that if someone wanted to buy a company and a foreign country wanted to buy a company, a U.S. company, you'd go through this laborious process to make sure that we weren't giving away technologies that were really, really critical to us, and we did not want that to happen. The Chinese studied CFIUS, and they knew how to get around CFIUS. They know how to get around CFIUS. It's just unbelievable through joint ventures, which weren't really covered by the initial CFIUS stuff. There are real estate transactions where they can look over and collect on other ones. None of those were covered under CFIUS. So the House and the Senate just recently passed an upgrade to CFIUS, which is really, really good for us. It doesn't get us all the way there, but it will help address the things that Adam is talking about. This, how do we protect AI IP or other type of technological IP that we really don't want to send to China? We'd like to make them do all the research rather than us give them the research.
And quickly, with regard to the second part of your question as well, about virtual sports, virtual reality, I think it's a question worth raising. So when people talk about the Chinese military and its potential weaknesses, one that is often pointed out is their lack of actual combat experience. As the Chinese military starts to use virtual reality and AI-enabled simulations and wargaming to prepare for actual combat, can they compensate for that shortcoming and actually step up their combat capabilities and have a greater sense of how to evaluate the military balance, experiment with new concepts of operations, and prepare their forces for combat they haven't experienced in the real world?
And Peter, we'll give you 30 seconds of the last word before we break.
Well, we heard about AlphaGo and AlphaGo Zero, and where I think that was DeepMind. I think Google bought DeepMind. I think it was a UK company. So it reminds me of this comment from earlier this morning. Let's build on one of our strengths, our alliances, and how we work with other like-minded countries. Because I don't think the UK had a big problem with Google buying DeepMind. So that's a strength, is we can build on the capabilities in not just in the US, but in our kind of partners and like-minded countries. And I think things like TPP we heard about this morning from the senators, it was a mistake to get out of something like that, is a lot of people's viewpoint, not everybody's viewpoint. And so getting back to a rules-based order, I think, is part of the solution to this and building on our strengths.
All right, and with that, we'll close, and we'll see you at the next session. Thanks, everyone.
All right.